Hello and welcome to my channel where I indulge my passion for all things book related. Today I'm going to talk about what to read after you've read Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens. If you watched my first video ever for this channel, then you know that I was in a 2-year, 9-month reading slump, which was broken by Where the Crawdads Sing. Once I read that book, I got into a reading frenzy because I just wanted to read more books like it, more books that would capture the flavor or have echoes of Where the Crawdads Sing. I did try a lot of books, try to read a lot of books that were on the list that people had suggested that were similar to Where the Crawdads Sing. But there were really only 4 books that I ended up reading all the way through that I felt captured a lot of the elements of what made Where the Crawdads Sing such a significant book for me, why I love it so much, what touched me the most about it. So before I launch into my list, I want to talk a little bit about Where the Crawdads Sing and what elements it had that the books that I'm going to mention share, or what was most memorable to me, what touched me the most. And so that's what I sought out in other books. All the books I'm going to mention share some of the most significant themes running through Where the Crawdads Sing. First of all, if you're watching this video, I'm going to assume that you've read Where the Crawdads Sing. If you haven't, there's probably going to be some spoilers. Otherwise, watch on. As I mentioned in my first video, the writing was the thing that drew me. The themes of nature, because Kaya ends up being a naturalist. She lives in the marsh, and she is fascinated by the wildlife, the plant life. And the thing about the feathers, the feathers. Anyway, I love that whole collage of scenes with the feathers, the bird feathers. It's just that's what I love about it. Just the fact that she was so at home in the wild, living off the land and surviving a wild animal herself. That's one theme, is the nature part, the naturalist part, the botanist part, the wildlife part that Delia Owens spends. You know, she really takes her time with the setting, with all those aspects that just took me away from my little house and into the marshes of North Carolina. It is just beautiful and just wild. That's the kind of book, the kind of books that that engrossed me. It just took me away to a different place, a place I've never been to. I feel that I'm drawn to because I do like being outdoors. The lyrical descriptions of the outdoors. As I noticed, as I've gathered, these books in this list, there is the really larger than life figure of the father in Where the Crawdads Sing and these other books. In Where the Crawdads Sing, the father is abusive, but he also has these touching moments with Kaya where they bond and where he teaches her to fish. And he has his moments where when he's not drunk and abusive. You can see how once upon a time in his younger days, he was a charming and magnetic person. And all these other books, they all share just a larger than life father figure that's really magnetic. Depending on the book, either not quite sure if they're villainous or evil, or they're just complex. They have demons. Launching onto my list. So the first book that came to mind when I started reading Where the Crawdads Sing is actually not a novel, but a memoir, The Glass Castle by Jeanette Walls. It's a true story in setting of West Virginia, rural West Virginia. Jeanette Walls grew up to be successful in media, a journalist and on TV. And she's still successful. Obviously, she's written a lot of stuff. but she came from this really impoverished background where her parents were these artistic, creative people, really kind of brilliant. The father is brilliant and kind of magical and creative, but they have demons. She and her family, her brothers and sisters, grew up basically as nomads. They're really, really poor, despite the father and the mother being like super, super smart. And the parents actually end up being homeless. But this is like their talk. A lot of the book is spent about this childhood that this turns like really hard, what the parents do to make it as magical as possible for their children, which is kind of wonderful in a way, but the dad too does. The parents too aren't like, very practical. Jeanette Walls and her siblings really had to like fight to survive, because they had to be kind of the grown-ups a lot of times. It can be argued that she wouldn't have been so successful as an adult had she not had this really hard childhood. But The Glass Castle is such a riveting read. All the more like amazing because it's all true. It's actually a very fast read. There's a movie with Woody Harrelson as the father and Brie Larson as Jeanette Walls. That's wonderful too. That's the first book I thought, as I was reading Kaya's childhood, like trying to make do from a very young age, and to cook for herself and her father, and trying to like be creative with what little that they have. That one I highly suggest. Now, the first book I read right after Where the Crawdads Sing is the one that I think captures the most of what I love about that book. And that book is The Sandkeeper by Erica Bauermeister. This book is a novel. It's about a little girl who is raised in an island with her father, just her and her father. They also live in a cabin and they're living off grid. They're living off the land. And the father is like trying to teach her how to survive off the land, just either fishing or growing their own food, next to no technology except for this one curious box, this little machine. She witnesses her father night after night taking these weird papers out of this machine, and it has scents in it. So a whole sensory experience about scents, and how her father teaches her how to instantly break down a scent, all the elements, the components that make up a scent, and she can and her nose becomes like really, really sharp. The writing is lyrical. Her father tells her fairy tales, and she grows up thinking, like, believing in these fairy tales, and it's all wrapped up in him teaching her how to detect scent, like tell a whole story about scents. And until, the day she figures out that everything he had told her was not quite true. And after that, it's her journey to finding out the truth about how they came to be in the island, who her dad is, who she is, and why he told her what he told her. I'm just going to read a little bit about, like in the beginning, no spoilers. She is begging her dad to take out the papers from this little machine, this mysterious machine that he keeps working on. And what do they mean? Each drawer contained a single small bottle, and inside each bottle was a piece of paper rolled around itself like a secret. The glass stoppers of the bottles were sealed with different colored waxes, red in the top rows, green for those below. My father almost never opened the bottles. "We need to keep them safe," he said. But I could hear the papers whispering inside the drawers. "Come find me." "Please," I'd ask, again and again. Finally, he agreed. My father had built a ladder that slid along the wall, and I watched him climb it almost to the ceiling, reaching into a drawer and drawing out its bottle. When he was back on the ground, he carefully broke the seal. I could hear glass screeching against glass as he pulled out the stopper, then the rustle of paper as he unrolled it into a plain white square. He leaned in close, inhaling, then wrote another number in the book. "Here," he said. "Breathe in, but not too much. Let the smell introduce itself." I did as he said. I kept my chest tight and my breath shallow. I could feel the tendrils of fragrance tickling the inside of my nose, slipping into the curls of my black hair. I could smell campfires made from a wood I didn't recognize. Dirt more parched than any I'd ever known. Moisture, ready to burst from clouds in a sky I'd never seen. It smelled like waiting. "Now breathe in deeply," my father said. I inhaled and fell into the fragrance like Alice down the rabbit hole. The theme of scent, as you can tell from the title, is carried throughout the book. It is very inventive. There's almost something almost mystical about how Erica Bauermeister incorporates, scent and scent making and scent detection in this novel. Almost magical, I would say. There's the hints of magic. There's also a love story that is troubled. There's betrayal. There's also, so it has a lot of elements that were in Where the Crawdads Sing. The Scent Keeper is such an engrossing book. It totally, took me away. It kept me really riveted. Out of all the books I'm going to recommend today, that is the book I would say came the closest to Where the Crawdads Sing, and highly recommended. Now, the next one is a little bit different. It's The Signature of All Things by Elizabeth Gilbert. At first glance, it doesn't really have a lot to do with Where the Crawdads Sing. The time, the time and setting completely different and set in Philadelphia. It's starts off in the 1700s and goes into the 1800s. But what brought me to mind of Where the Crawdads Sing is the main character, Alma, who is also a naturalist. She is raised by this kind of larger than life, very colorful father who is probably one of the most colorful characters in the book. And his story is just like one adventure after the other. I loved reading about him as well. And he has his, I would say, flaws, but he's definitely an endearing figure. Let me just say that he's an endearing figure. There's nothing evil or really cruel about him, so he doesn't really have a lot to do with the father in Where the Crawdads Sing. And the similarity only goes so far as that they're both like really just loom large in their daughters' lives. Alma, she's described as having her father's face, and she's this big woman, and so she's not attractive, basically, but she's so smart, so sharp, and she's well educated. Her father gives her the finest education, and she takes that and she ends up devoting her life to the study of the natural world. And it is really, really fascinating to me. I listened 90% of it as an audiobook, and it's the narrator was wonderful. I just love that part about her botanical exploits. Her story and the stories of her family and other characters kind of take a turn that I didn't really expect. There's Captain Cook in there, a father sailing off into Tahiti, and then there's the life in Philadelphia where Alma grows up, and then Alma herself, she goes to Tahiti and then to Amsterdam. On the outside, it doesn't seem like a lot happens to her. It's like the plants that she studies. It's when you look closer, it's teeming with life and surprising discoveries. I love the descriptions of her being in the woods. There were the endless sylvan acres of woodland left purposely uncultivated, filled with rabbits, foxes, and park deer who would eat out of one's hand. Alma was allowed, nay encouraged by her parents, to wander that woodland at will in order to learn the natural world. She gathered beetles, spiders, and moths. She watched a large striped snake be eaten alive one day by a much larger black snake, a process that took several hours and was horrible and a spectacular display. She watched tiger spiders dig deep tubes into the duff and robins gather moss and mud from the river's edge for their nests. She adopted a handsome little caterpillar, handsome by caterpillar standards, and rolled him into a leaf to take home as a friend, though she later accidentally murdered him by sitting on him. That was a severe blow, but one carried on. That is what her mother said. Stop your weeping and carry on. Animals die, it was explained. Some animals, like sheep and cows, are born for no other purpose except to die. One could not mourn every death. By the age of 8, Alma had already dissected, with Beatrix's assistance, the head of a lamb. The Signature of All Things is a kind of a sprawling book. There's a huge cast of characters in terms of her family. There's the irascible father, the very sensible kind of practical mother, and then her nurse, Hanukkah, who's just, like the really mother nurturing figure. And there's her sister, the beautiful Prudence, who, they start off like just hating, or Alma hates her for her beauty, but it ends up like, Prudence doesn't turn out the way I thought that her character would turn out. And actually, I just ended up like just my heart going out to her in the end. And then there's a love story of sorts. And that goes in a surprising direction as well. I mean, there's parts of Alma's life has a tragic trajectory, but in the end, it's kind of like, there's a lot of admiration for her. Elizabeth Gilbert did a really great job. I just kind of only knew her from Eat, Pray, Love, her memoir. And there are some things about Eat, Pray, Love that are in here in like some similar themes in terms of Alma starts out like in the physical world, just kind of like really immersed in the whole sensory scientific study and the wonders, and then kind of goes into the realm of like the spiritual, and then in the end, again goes back to like the whole meaning of it all. In terms of, the signature, you find out what the signature of all things actually mean. That's my recommendation, the signature of all things. The last book I'm going to recommend is The Marsh King's Daughter by Karen Dion. It has a lot of the elements that I mentioned. It has, the larger than life father. And there's the wilderness, survivalist aspect of it. The book opens with Helena, who's like a wife and mother in her 30s, I believe. She's been living this life that she's, kind of, normal mom, normal wife. But then her whole world blows up because what she didn't tell her husband was that her father actually kidnapped her mother when her mother was a young teen. And so Helena is actually a product of a kidnapping. Her father took her mother away, and when she was born, they lived in in a cabin in the woods in rural Michigan. Actually grew up not knowing what her father did, and her mother was just kind of in the background and the victim of the dad. But come to find out, that her father gets caught for whatever reason and sent to prison. And then, but years and years later, now that she's grown up, like made a life for herself, but hasn't told anyone who she is and her background, her father has escaped. Helena realizes that her father, who taught her everything he knew about tracking, hunting, surviving in the wild, is going to be way ahead of law enforcement, because law enforcement has never seen anybody like him. And that the only person who can catch him is her, because he taught her everything that he knew. The only one who is a good enough hunter, a good enough tracker to get her dad. A lot of the book is spent describing her childhood in the woods, in the wild. You know, how he teaches her how to hunt, how he teaches her how to kill animals. He teaches her how to, you know, track animals, how to survive in the wild. Her dad is part Ojibwe, I believe. You get the sense as Helena is describing her dad and her childhood that he has gone off the deep end, obviously, because he kidnapped her mom and raised, and she herself was raised in captivity. And he definitely, I mean, he's another one of those characters that's like a charismatic dad. He's larger than life. He's, you know, to her, to her, much of when she was growing up, he's a hero, because he's like, he can do anything. He can do all the stuff and all these things in the wild, and she wants to be just like him. But you, as an adult, as a reader, knowing what he did to the mom, knowing that this is all like he's just forced her into this life, you know, that he's no good. That there is that tension a lot of the time, like, you know, you half admire him and just kind of like, this guy he's like a villain. And she herself is torn about how she feels about her dad. And so if you like the nature part and the living, surviving off the land part and where the Crawdads sing, and you like the kind of thrilling kind of murder mystery part of it, The Marsh King's Daughter is going to be a good fit for you. And Karen Dion is like, this book just grabbed me and would not let go. You don't ever settle into like a, you know, calm, false sense of security. Every chapter has some sort of twist, something that'll grab you, something that'll unsettle you. It is just, the writing is sharp, the plot is fast, a fast heartbeat of a book. The Marsh King's Daughter has a lot of bleakness to it, but also it's like so fast paced. It has a lot of scenes that will keep you on the edge of your seat. That's my final recommendation. Each one, I think, captures a different aspect, feature of where the Crawdads sing. And I think there's like going to be something for everyone. And I hope you try one of them. If you've read any of them, let me know in the comments below. I'd love to know what you think, if you agree with my choices, or if there are other books that you want to recommend as well. I tried to read a bunch, but these four were the only ones that stuck with me. A lot of lists recommended Barbara Kingsolver's books, Flight Behavior, Prodigal Summer, books set in Appalachia, writing about nature and the wilderness. But I could never really get into it, but that's something to check out. Or let me know if you agree with that, if Barbara Kingsolver's books actually a better fit, or be good to turn to. I did try them, like maybe I just wasn't in the mood, but I did try them. So those are bonus. I can't recommend or dissuade you from that, because I haven't read all those. I just read like a few chapters of each. So let me know. Hopefully you found something useful. I'm gonna bid you goodbye. I'm gonna wish that you find a good book, and happy reading until next time.